Hey everyone, welcome to Geeking Out, the podcast in which we dive into the career journeys of some of the amazing humans in tech and geek out on topics like software development, DevOps, observability, reliability, and everything in between. I'm your host, Adriana Villela, coming to you from Toronto, Canada. And geeking out with me today, I have Duffie Cooley. Welcome, Duffie.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. You have such a tremendous, history of podcasts so far. So I'm just really grateful to be a part of it.
Oh, thank you so much. And Duffie, where are you calling from today?
I live in Alameda, which is not too far from San Francisco. It's right across the Bay Bridge.
I gotta like nerd out with you when you said Alameda. It always makes me think of Star Trek 4.
It is. It is the same place. This is where the nuclear vessels were hosted. Yes.
Exactly. So this is why I know of Alameda.
hmm Another one that people connect with is what do you call it? Mythbusters.
Oh,
Mythbusters did a bunch of stuff like out on this and you're like, where in the Bay Area did you find such a big flat space to like crash semi trucks? Here in Alameda on the Point. That was where it was filmed.
oh, that's so wild. I remember Mythbusters. That was a great show.
It was. I love the whole premise. It's like people having like the some challenging thing, and you're like, is it real? Did it really happen? All right, let's try
Yeah,
it out.
yeah. And by the way, my final comment on Alameda and the Star Trek movies. I know everyone loves Wrath of Khan, but Star Trek 4 still holds a
It's true.
place in my heart as the best one because there is time travel and Scotty talking to an old Mac. So,
I remember seeing that movie for the first time. I grew up in Hawaii,
oh,
and
cool.
that movie is one of the movies that I absolutely remember seeing in the Ka'ahumanu Theater, like in Kahului in Maui. It's like there are a few movies where you like really connect with a place and a time, and that's like
Yeah.
one of those movies for me.
Oh, that's so awesome. Cool. I have so many questions now about like growing up in Hawaii. But I'm going to start first with our lightning round questions. Are you
All
ready?
right.
Or icebreaker. I just call them lightning round, but they're not lightning. Okay, first question. Are you lefty or righty?
I'm a righty, but I am
All right.
dyslexic, so jury's out.
Ah. Love it. Next question. Do you prefer iPhone or Android?
iPhone,
All right. Next one. Do you prefer Mac, Linux, or Windows?
Linux all day. I've been a Linux on the desktop user for 20 something years at this point.
Oh, damn. What's your favorite distro?
My favorite distro, it's a tough one. I've been through so many. I think Arch is probably my current favorite because of
Ah,
the community builds and everything else like that. At work, however, when I'm at Cisco, I have to use Ubuntu, which I don't mind. It's a great distro as well. But yeah, like for the obscure kind of stuff that you need to make your desktop your own, I think Arch is really the
mm,
great one.
nice, nice. Yeah, that is one thing. Like Linux does let you play around a lot.
Almost to its detriment, yes.
Yeah, that's true. My only beef with Linux, and maybe it's improved. It's been a while. Was like I couldn't get it to play with all the peripherals all the time, and when I used to have like an iPhone that I had to connect to my computer to sync. Or actually,
Mhm.
even before that, I had a BlackBerry. I couldn't use the BlackBerry software to sync my BlackBerry to my Linux
Yeah.
box, sadly.
It's a challenge for sure. I mean, I was just recently speaking of geeking out. I'm also a motorcycle rider, and I was
Oh, cool.
recently changing the programming of the computer that operates the motorcycle's fueling and electrical systems. And for that, I needed a Windows computer because the only software that I could use to load the program onto the device that was doing the programming was a Windows computer. And so I again remembered how to do this with Vagrant. I spun up a Windows 11 machine, figured out how to do USB pass through because I'm not going to install Windows just to try this out, right? Like
Yeah,
there
yeah.
has to be, like, but yeah, I feel you on the challenge of like being able to having to deal with stuff that sometimes is just it's Windows is the only way, and
Yes. But
yeah,
also, you were like updating software on your motorcycle. Feel like you buried the lead there.
well, it's interesting stuff. I mean, it's like with motorcycle, actually with most fuel injected vehicles, especially recent ones, they have an ECU that's responsible for like the timing and the fueling.
Hmm.
And from the factory, they come in in this state where, because of the way that the regulations work, they have to stay within a particular range of fueling and timing to remain underneath an emissions thing, which does two things. I mean, I appreciate the emissions challenge, but the other part of it is that it causes the motorcycle to run very lean a lot of the time, which causes the motorcycle to run hot. And actually, you end up in this kind of like weird bad loop where the motorcycle can't really operate at efficiency. So it's continuing to run badly, and if it were to able to run efficiently, it would actually run significantly more efficiently than the computer program allows for. And so that was the change I was making, was allowing for the computer to actually learn from the sensors on the bike how efficiently it's running, so it can actually do a better learning loop and
Oh.
operate correctly. Right? It's still a in the tune that I put on this motorcycle is still a 50 state tune. If I had to go and get my exhaust checked, it would still pass.
Hmm.
It's just that it allows the motorcycle to be unrestricted in how it fuels and times the bike, so
Hmm.
that it's still being very efficient, but it's not being held back by that regulation.
Got it. Got it. That's very cool.
Super
So
interesting stuff.
like, what do you write that in?
Oh, I'm not sure. I didn't actually write this one. This is all like I. So basically, what I get back is a program that looks like a map, right? It looks a little bit like a graph, and
Hmm.
the units on one side are perhaps things like measurements of oxygen uh, and measurements of temperature and things like that. And on the other side, we have like timing adjustment, like up or down, and also fueling, how much fueling. And you can think of this like a big heat map, right? And what it's trying to do is it's trying to figure out a way to make it so that as you move through the power cycle of the motorcycle, it's creating a scenario where everything is fueled and timed correctly based on the temperature and the oxygen levels being measured at the exhaust system,
Oh, cool.
right? And so it's like it's this, and this is what I mean by
Hmm.
a kind of a closed loop system, they call it,
Hmm.
because it's constantly measuring the situation at hand and trying to adjust timing and fuel based on that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so cool.
But I
That's
think
so
it's probably written in C or something crazy because it's
yeah,
been
yeah.
around forever. Yeah, I feel like
That's
it's one of those industries ripe for disruption, but nothing is ever like it's
yeah.
such a niche thing, Like
So true, so true. Yeah, that's so cool. It isn't it wild to realize. I mean, I think we already know deep in the back of our minds that computers run our vehicles, but it's still like, I
yeah,
don't know, kind of blows my mind.
it is a trip. Yeah, for sure. Like, and it's funny. There are still you can still find vehicles for which this is not true, right? Like there's still
Mhm.
plenty of vehicles out there that are still carbureted and all of that stuff.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah, like with fuel injection and all of that, it's really come a long way.
yeah,
Just a couple of years ago, I bought my first all electric car, and that's nothing but computers, right? Like there's other than brakes, maybe,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And speaking of electric cars, like, so I have a hybrid, and when we bought the hybrid, the first time I drove it and it was in electrical mode, I'm like,
Mhm.
what's going on? There's no
What is
noise. Like, it breaks your brain.
Yeah, it's a trippy thing. And then, just a power band and everything. And then I thought when I bought this car, because I come from, like I had a Mini Cooper Clubman before this, and I've had a Honda Element, a bunch of other cars that
Mhm.
are great cars. But like, I thought that when I bought the electric car, I would have like range anxiety, that I would be worried.
Hmm.
Like I would have this concern of like, am I going to be able to get to the next charging station? Like, and really, it's not a thing in California. In
Right,
California, where I do all of my driving,
right,
it's not a thing I have to worry about at all.
right, right. This is the
And
place to own an electric car.
yeah, and also the car goes 200 something miles on a charge,
Damn.
so it's not like it's not like it's like that's about what a tank would have taken me,
Yeah,
right? Like a
yeah,
tank
yeah.
of gas would have taken me about the same distance. So it's like it's already kind of like aligned with like my mental picture of like how far I can go before I have to deal with the gas thing.
That's great. And does your
Yeah, it's
car
really
charge fast?
It is, yeah. It's like the 400-volt system or the 800-volt system or something. So I pull in into a fast charger, and 20 minutes later from empty, I'm at like 80 or 90 or something like
Oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I heard there's like some really cool technology out there as well that allows you to swap out car batteries. So then I guess it makes the experience a lot better, so that you're not having to sit there, waiting 20 minutes for a charge even.
I've heard of that one. I've also heard of like there's another one that I've seen, or I haven't seen it, but I've heard it read about, which is like they put like a mat in your driveway or whatever, and then like
Ooh.
it's like wireless charging, so you
Oh
just
my
come in and
god.
park. Like
Oh my god.
wild, right? Like overnight, it would just wireless. It would be like your little mouse or whatever, and just wirelessly charge. But yeah, I haven't seen any of
Wow.
that in person, but it's pretty amazing.
Damn. Mind blown.
Yeah.
That is so trippy. Well, I could keep on asking questions about this, but I'm going to move on to the next question in our series. Do you have a
Oh,
favorite programming language?
do I have a favorite programming language? Woo, that's tough. I will say Python.
Oh, I love Python, so Team
And
Python.
and to qualify that, I think I'll say Python because of IPython. I'm a type of learner that I kind of need to be hands on.
Mhm.
I need to be able to ask questions of a thing with my hands and like figure out how it works.
Yeah, yeah.
And it really unlocked my ability to understand how programming works because like you can write all kinds of crazy ways of transforming data and dictionaries and all this other stuff, but unless you're able to like jump in and see what state it's in, like did it work? Is it doing the thing I expect? Like
Hmm.
in an interactive way,
Yeah.
I have a hard time like in my head like putting together how that works. It's easier
Yeah.
now with like structs and Go. Like it's like it kind of like it makes it a little bit easier to understand what the shape the data will take. But like in Python, I feel like was the first one that really unlocked like being able to watch a program work through the different parts of the logical flow.
Right, right. That's so cool. Love it. Okay, next question. Do you prefer dev or ops?
I think I prefer ops, and the reason is like for me, a big part of the thing that gets me up in the morning, the thing that drives me to go and do it again, is the people.
Hmm.
And so between dev and ops, I feel like dev frequently like we are working on our own to improve a piece of software or some piece of infrastructure or whatever it is, and we're focused on that work. And then like maybe once a day or perhaps like a couple times a week, we go and we meet each other and talk about what we're going to work on together, etc. And in ops, it's like a daily group. You're working in a team, right? Like it's you're handing off between the different parts of it and all of that pretty constantly. And I feel like that's definitely more my speed. I've done operations before for a number of different companies, but yeah, like I really like the people part of the puzzle as much as I like the technology. So I need
Nice.
both of those things to really feel like I'm doing the right work.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's true. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's so interesting. I feel like we all crave like human connection, a place to belong, and then finding like our people in our little like niche of work, right, is so so important.
Completely agree. Yeah, and I feel like dev is. Oh, there you are. And I feel like dev is challenging because like it can feel very isolating, right? Like I feel
Mm.
like in many ways, and some people are into that, right? Like it takes all kinds, right? Like some
Yeah,
people,
yeah,
for them, like being able to really apply their whole self to that problem and move that problem along is all they need, and that's great,
yeah.
right? But for me, I need that multiple puzzle piece, like
I totally feel you. Yeah, it is interesting that dev really is a solo endeavor, unless you do like pair programming or swarm programming, which I don't know.
yeah,
I'm too much of a control freak to do pair programming. And I'm the one who has to be on the driver's seat. I've only paired successfully like with one friend, and it was like, he knew that I was the one who had to be in the driver's seat, and he was happy to stay in the passenger seat, and it worked really well. But I don't know if I could do that with anyone else.
I'm curious if you have tried doing like pair programming with like a computer or with like AI or something
Oh,
like
like
that.
vibe coding? I have not. I'm not. Yeah, I wouldn't say I've tried vibe coding yet, but that's on my to-do list. I feel like I finally have a project for vibe coding for
Nice.
myself. Because I hate doing front end. I'm allergic to
Yeah.
front end dev. Like
I mean, to
JavaScript
be fair,
lost me years
it
ago.
is an entire thing. Like, oh yeah, like completely with you on that. It's like you might understand databases and data manipulation, all this other stuff, and then you get into front end, you're like, what in the world is happening?
Exactly. Like you lost me at JavaScript and CSS, and like the
Yeah.
fact that shit doesn't work for multiple browsers. I'm like, no,
Oh
no.
my God. Yes. Right.
Right.
Like, wow.
Yeah, so my vibe coding project is build me a website.
I like it. I like it.
Because right now, like I host my blog on Medium, and I'm happily doing that, but like I have owned my own domain since I think 2000. And I've not, it's been a while since I've done anything with it. I think I might have had stuff on it a long time ago, some like shitty static web page that has long since been taken down.
Amazing.
This is my excuse. So yes, I like you. You are so right though on like pair programming, like vibe coding is like pair programming with the AI. That's cool. Okay, next question in the series. Do you prefer JSON or YAML?
JSON or YAML? Wow. Well, I was, a few years ago, I was working with Rory McHugh, Ian Coldwater, and Brad Giesman, and we were looking at an exploit on YAML, which allows for a multiplication attack, where it was called Billion Honks. It's a really fun CVE in the Kubernetes CVE history. And what this would do is in YAML, there's this idea that you can take an anchor and then generate code based on that anchor where you apply it within your YAML file. And there was no upper bound set on the expansion of the anchor. So what this meant was that like you could actually like submit a very small YAML file that would result in an expansion of memory in the API server and cause it to fall over.
Wow, damn.
So there is no such thing in JSON. Like there's no like expansion idea in JSON. This is a feature only of the YAML of the YAML thing. And
Oh wow.
so I don't know which one I prefer. I'd say that YAML is probably easier on the human, and JSON is definitely easier on the computer.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. Yeah, I find YAML easier on the eyes. I find the curly braces of JSON like too much for me. It's noise.
Yeah, and if you don't have if you don't have some kind of IDE to tell you when you're blowing it, it's really very difficult to write,
Yeah.
right? Like, but it's also interesting that YAML has these like challenges, like it'll determine it like a Boolean value is different than uh, is detected as a YAML feature rather than as a Boolean value. And like the date thing, there's a bunch of weird little picadillos about YAML that make it maybe not quite incompatible, but certainly not the perfect tool for what we use it for. And where you apply quotes and where you don't, and how do you escape sequences and like,
Oh yeah.
oh my gosh, there's so many things. Yeah.
Quotes. Yeah, yeah. The quotes, the damn quotes. It's like, do you like quotes? Do you not like quotes? Tell
I
me.
came across a very interesting problem leveraging YAML in Ansible the other day,
Hmm.
and because I was trying to basically create a string that actually had quotes in it, and I was having the hardest time getting uh, Ansible to do the right thing in templating. It was actually using Jinja really at the end of the day, but like
Mm.
I couldn't get Jinja to do the thing I was trying to get it to do because of the escaping.
Oh yeah.
And then I finally figured out that they have actually built a function called unsafe,
Oh.
and you just like mark this particular string unsafe, and they're like, just don't interpret it, just put it in and just put it in and take it out. And like, don't try to play with it. Don't try to understand what it says. Just use this string as I have given it to you. And it works great.
Oh wow. That's great.
It was absolutely amazing. Life changing, right? Because like trying to manipulate. I was like, is it 3 single quotes and then a double quote? Is it like I'm trying to figure out how to make this work, and I could not get
Yeah.
it. And then finally, I found unsafe.
Oh my God. Gotta love the name too. Unsafe.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yay, software people. Okay, next question. Do you prefer spaces or tabs?
I prefer that my tab presents as 2 spaces.
Because of the YAML shit.
Yes.
That's honestly why I started like converting my tabs into spaces in VS Code, is because of YAML. I still like
Exactly.
YAML over JSON though, for all its shortcomings.
For sure.
Okay, 2 more questions. Are you more of a video or text person for learning stuff?
Ooh, tricky. I think it depends on what I'm learning, actually. So I think if I'm learning programming, or I'm learning a new language or learning some new tricks about that language, I'll typically read it, or I'll typically um, find a sufficiently advanced program written in the language that I want to learn, and then go see how they do it and figure
Yeah.
out like the different little challenges that they've run into and how they solve them, and like kind of dig into it from that perspective. But I'm always looking for stuff like the pragmatic this, or like 101 weird problems with X. Like I'm always looking for that kind of content to understand what's up. Like there's a great article that a good friend wrote that was writing about the Go language that like
Yeah.
describes all the weird stuff that you don't really expect, like shadow copies and like that kind of stuff. So that's reading. But then on the learning, so I'm a Rubik's cuber. I play with Rubik's
Oh.
cubes all the time. It's like one of the things I picked up during the pandemic.
Oh, cool.
And for that, uh, I feel like I need to watch somebody solve using a particular algorithm a couple of times, and then I can try it manually,
Yeah.
and then once I start doing it manually, then it's like a manual memory, and I can actually remember it, right? But
Right.
like, yeah, I think it depends on what I'm learning.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I feel like trying to solve a Rubik's cube by reading instructions would be so hard.
Yes, really. I mean, and that's how it was for a long time. I mean, there was Rubik's cubes were around before YouTube, right? Like,
Yeah, that's true. That's so true. I mean, the stuff we take for granted, honestly, like it just blows my mind, like the other day I was watching the show on Apple TV Plus called Constellation. I don't know if you've seen it yet. Really good sci-fi. But they one of the characters had like it's she wasn't it's like like current day, but she had a cassette tape. And someone
oh,
had sent her
amazing,
someone had sent her a cassette tape, and my thought was, how the fuck is she gonna play this cassette tape?
right?
And she had like a toy like cassette tape player, I guess, that her kid had, and that's how she played the cassette tape. And I'm like, damn, like I'm thinking back, I think I got rid of my last tape player, I don't know, like 5 years ago when I moved. And I've
Mhm.
got like, I don't have an actual dedicated CD player. I've got a couple of like external CD drives sitting under my desk for just in case.
Right?
It's, I mean, all these things that we used to rely on, like just gone. I remember handing in like my homework in university on floppy disks.
Or zip drives. Remember zip drives?
Oh
That was
my
like
god,
even
zip
a
drive.
shorter flash in the sun, right? Like that
Yeah,
was like,
yeah, that was very
yeah,
short lived. It was so short lived that I never owned a zip drive.
yeah. So it's one thing. My experience with zip drives, which was funny, was like I worked at Juniper for about 6.5 years, and
Mhm.
Juniper builds routers and switches, and some of those routers were built during the period of time when flash drives were a thing.
Yeah.
And so, like to load software onto the router, there is a class of router. I can't remember which one it is, but there's some Juniper router that it actually uses zip drives
Wow.
to load the operating system into the router. And this is in like 2006,
Oh
2007, somewhere in
damn.
there, and like we're like trolling eBay trying to find flash drives. Like, because like even working at Juniper, like nobody's selling them new anymore, right? Like you're just like
Yeah.
trying to find old stock so we can keep these routers alive. It was amazing.
Holy crap. Okay, final question. We've reached our final question of the icebreaker questions.
Okay.
What is your superpower?
Whew. My superpower. I think when you ask other people what my superpower is, it's that I am able to communicate complicated things in a way that is easy to understand. I think my superpower is that, we all have our own challenges, and one of the challenges that I have is like I had a series of experiences that really taught me that I have to think about perspective differently.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that if I'm looking at a problem, I can only ever understand the problem with my own faculties, my own eyes, my own brain, my own hands. I can only understand it so far, and that's limited by my experience, right? My
Mm-hmm.
but what I've gone through before, or whatever it is. However, if I try and teach that thing, then I get exposed to the faculties of others, right? They might say, "What happens if this happens? What happens if
Yep.
that happens? Hey, have you thought about this? Like what happens when this other part happens?" And I'm like, and those for me are like the most valuable thing. So in a way, that's my superpower is I don't rest on the idea of a single perspective.
Ooh, I like that. That's very cool and so important because it made me think back to like my husband's also in tech, and so and we're in different areas, and so I'll be telling him about some of the stuff that I'm working on, and then he'll start asking questions because it's not his area, and I'm like, oh. And I almost I have to say I almost get annoyed because
Right?
because I'm like, why are you thinking about it that way? And it's like, then I have to kind of take a step back and think, of course he's thinking it that way because he's approaching it from a completely different angle. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and it's always, I mean, it's such a trippy thing that I feel like all of us bring. There's a number of different like concepts that talk about this, right? Like one of them
Mhm.
is the idea of the beginner's mind, right?
Mhm.
In the beginner's mind, all things are possible. In the expert's mind, very few.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right? But there's a ton of different like concepts that speak about this as
Yeah.
it relates to people, and I love the whole idea that like we each bring our own perspective to a set of problems, whether that problem is related to humans, whether that problem is related to coding, whether that problem is related to logic. We each have a built up over our journey, like a different set of understandings and expectations about how these things work.
Yeah.
And being open to that is huge, right? Like that's, I think, probably the biggest skill of a teacher that we don't really talk about is that like being open to those perspectives that are not their own is such a huge
Yeah.
thing.
It really is because it opens so many doors.
Yeah, in your own brain and everybody else's brain, like it's like we all, you and I were both talking about like lifelong learning. I think we were talking about this. So, lifelong learners, when you're in tech, you're constantly learning. You never
Yeah,
stop
yeah.
learning. And I
So
feel like
true.
that's a big piece of it too, right? Like
It
a
is.
way to really actively engage in that is to think about the limitations of perspective.
Yeah, and I think, going staying on that lifelong learner topic, you can't I feel like you can't be in tech and not be a lifelong learner and expect your career to progress. And I think being open to different perspectives is what allows that to happen. Because I think people who jumped on to like anytime you're jumping onto new tooling or new concepts, like getting
Open up,
wrapping your mind
yeah,
around DevOps, like what you're telling me I have to like do my work differently, like it's hard,
yeah,
it's scary.
it's
So
totally
yeah.
true. Yeah, yeah, and I mean, even outside of tech, I think that's true, right? Like
Mm.
if you're a chef, you're
Oh
like,
my god, yes.
you're a hairstylist, you're like any number of different things for you to really progress.
Yeah. And certainly anything artistic. I mean, you can't just be like okay with the status quo. Can you
Yeah,
imagine? No evolution. How boring. How boring.
nope. Yeah, wild stuff.
Yeah. Well, we got through all the icebreaker questions. Woohoo.
Nice.
Thanks for playing along. I have so many questions because so actually there's one thing I want to touch upon because you mentioned earlier on that you're dyslexic. And I was wondering because my husband's dyslexic as well, and so for him, like one of the things that I've learned because I'm a fast reader, I guess certainly compared to him, And it has taught me, being married to him, that if I'm showing him something, I have to be super patient, as and respectful of the pace in which he reads. And he talks about a lot about coping mechanisms, as a dyslexic person.
My experience is very different than your husband's.
Mhm.
I imagine that like everything is on a spectrum at some point,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But
of course.
when I was when I was coming up, I failed the second grade, and my mom figured out that the reason I was failing was that I was dyslexic. The school didn't have the wherewithal to make that assumption or make that assessment themselves.
Hmm.
And so my mom went and learned how to teach a dyslexic kid how to read, and she taught me to read. And then after that, I was reading at a collegiate level like very quickly. Like
Oh, cool.
after I understood how this worked, it was game on, you know. Like
Damn, that's awesome.
and like you at this point, like if I'm looking at a page of text, I would have to actively not read it,
Hmm.
right? Like I'm
Hmm.
already processing the data on that page, just having it in my vision.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah,
I'm not thinking about I'm not thinking about the process. I'm not like, and I can read log files looking for a particular thing. It's like it's one of those. It's like it's an incredibly quick way of getting information into your brain, but like but it's definitely a skill, right? Like
yeah.
yeah, it's a trippy thing.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's cool that you got like a diagnosis, or at least I guess recognition,
Yeah,
early on in life, because my husband was, he had the experience where I think it was, he never even got like a formal diagnosis. It was like after, a long time of struggling, and I guess reading enough
yeah,
stuff online, where he's like, oh shit, I think I might actually be dyslexic. And it tracks, and it his experience was such a negative one, where it's like, the teachers would like harp on him over like, oh, you're not applying yourself, and like you're kind
yeah.
of slow, and blah blah blah, and it, kind of, he was almost dismissed. He bet on himself. But like,
100%.
and computers kind of saved him, but like it was no thanks to, people who didn't recognize that at the time. So kudos to your mom for like really, um,
My gosh, yeah,
helping, my god.
yeah. I can't, I can't. It's such a wild thing to think about, but like I can't imagine that not working out the way that it did. Because like, where
Mhm.
would I be? Like I don't even know what life would look like if my mom had not figured that out in the time
Yeah,
that she did and like helped me out. It's wild,
yeah,
like
yeah.
it's one of those turning points that happens so early in the maze that you're like how like how else would that have gone? Like
Yeah, right?
so crazy.
It's trippy, yeah, so kudos, that's amazing. Yeah, and thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Another thing that I wanted to ask, you mentioned, so you said so were you born in Hawaii, or you grew up in Hawaii, or both?
I was born in California, and
Okay,
then my parents were never like kind of like really together. Like my father and my mother were like together, and they were traveling together for quite a while, but they were never really like a long term thing. And so my mother and my stepfather met, and they married, and then basically about a year after that, when I was I think 8 and my sister was 4, we moved to Hawaii because that's where they wanted to be.
nice.
And I was in Hawaii from when I was 8 until basically just around high school, like middle school, high school time, and then moved back to California to live with my dad, and then kind of went back and forth between California and Hawaii for several years. Um, yeah, doing like visiting my mom or coming back to live with my dad. And I remember like all these weird little culture shocks. So, for example, one of the first times back to California to live with my dad, the first time, um, he was living here in San Jose. He was living
Mhm,
down in San Jose, and I had this wild experience. So in Hawaii, it's always been very expensive because
mhm,
a lot of food you have to get in, right?
right,
Go into the grocery store with $20, it's not going to end up with a lot of groceries, even at the time. Like in the early '90s or the late '80s, it was still very expensive.
yeah,
And so, um, having that experience of like being able to go into a grocery store in San Jose, like a big saver or whatever, right? and walk out with a grocery cart full of food for $20 was mind blowing.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
as a teenage boy, I'm like, this is not making sense to me right now. But it was like, it was such a crazy thing, like having that experience of like, wow, this like understanding the economic climate of different areas and like
Yeah.
realizing that it's wildly different. Like, or even gas. The price of gas in Hawaii was always more expensive than the price of
Oh,
gas.
yeah.
Like, I remember gas in California being as cheap as like not less than $1.
Wow. Wow.
Never a thing in Hawaii. Like,
That is wild. It's so cool though that it kind of it teaches you different perspectives and gives you an appreciation as well for those
yeah,
things.
these are some of those experiences that I was talking about that really kind of
Yeah.
drove me to think that like that perspective is more important than your own, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And out of curiosity, like what got you into tech?
so when I was in high school, I got into computers, and I was one of the people who kind of understood computer. Like, my brain has always just kind of understood how computers work pretty well.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was like the teacher's aide in the computer class, and I was getting into like all the different things from that perspective. And I was also into theater at the time, so and it was technical theater, so doing lights, sound, staging, rigging, all of that stuff. And so, interestingly, both of these two fields involve technology.
Mhm.
And so it was a thing that really kind of like became a through line for me. It was like working in different technical fields. So like whether that was um, for years when I was working in Hawaii, I was doing lighting, sound, staging, rigging, and I was always uh, you know working in that part of the tech. Because in Hawaii, if you're not working in the tourism industry in some way, you're not working. Right? It's
Right,
it's
right.
it's really hard.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and so when I came to California, and I was like, already pretty good with my computer, already like exploring Linux, already exploring Windows, and I was kind of like playing with all the different operating systems and how they all work and all that stuff. I started getting into systems administration, and I went from systems administration into network administration because, again, it's one of those like things I really wanted to know how all of that worked.
Yeah.
And so, best way for me to understand how all of that worked was to go and play with it, like to go
Yeah.
work on it, like.
Yeah.
So got into network administration, systems administration. I first broke into real tech when I and just before the year 2000, and I joined a couple of companies that were providing DSL. There were DSL wholesalers, so that
Yeah.
Cobad and Northpoint Communications were the two that I joined, and both of them were tremendous experiences because they were both of in Cobad. I was actually out doing physical installations of DSL,
Oh,
and
cool.
there's all kinds of crazy stories related to that. And then at Northpoint, I went inside and I was doing customer support, and I was actually answering phone calls of installers and also customers who were trying to understand why their thing wasn't working or how to get this turned on or etc. And so I
Nice.
went from like customer support up into the architecture level pretty quickly because I understood how these systems work pretty well, and I was able to communicate it and teach it and share it, and that became like my path to kind of a higher, I don't know, like a more senior role, or it really gave me an opportunity to kind of jump into different parts of the system because I was able to teach and bring people with me.
Yeah, and it's such a wonderful feeling when you're able to like get through to people, right?
Yeah,
Through like,
seeing the light come on, it's amazing.
yeah. The network stuff that you were doing, was it all like self-taught or like how did you come to learn it?
A lot of it was self-taught. A lot of it was actually also um, exploring how things work based. Like, there's always been like a number of different technologies out there, like GNS, graphical network simulator,
Hmm.
where you can actually like on a reasonably inexpensive computer build a whole research lab and explore this stuff. And Kubernetes, there's kind, right?
Yeah.
Kubernetes and Docker. It's another great
Yeah.
example. You don't need to have an Amazon account to be able to play with Kubernetes. You can play with it in Docker on your laptop, right? Like, those particular types of things have always been around for people who want to play with them and understand how different parts work and understand different protocols and understand how to build adjacencies and how to troubleshoot, and like those things have been around for a long time, whether they were kind or whether they were GNS or like things like this. And so
Yeah.
that's always been kind of like, I'm going to let my curiosity, like, what happens if I'm trying to convert from, you know, BGP to OSPF? Like, I don't know. Let's try it.
So yeah, so you've basically gravitated towards networking for a chunk of your career. Then is that accurate?
Yeah, I think networking, distributed systems, people, it's always been one thing or another. I've worked
Yeah.
on a variety of different technology efforts across a variety of different companies. I helped build the first shared infrastructure at Apple, and it
Ooh,
was great.
cool.
It was called Pi, Platform Infrastructure Engineering. So Apple Pi, we were so proud of that name.
Oh my
Anyway,
god. That's so cool. How was it working at Apple?
I think, as with many big companies, I think Apple has an incredible opportunity to go and work with do some of the best work of your life.
Yeah.
If you find yourself in the right group, working with the right people, um, putting giving you the right opportunity and really letting you kind of like grow into that, I think
Yeah.
that you can really find that at Apple. You can also find the opposite experience where like you come in with this, but perhaps it's not even really about what you bring to it. Sometimes that you're in a situation where it's just untenable and it's not going to work for you, and you're going to need to go somewhere else and go find another opportunity somewhere else. And I think this is true of most big companies. You find these little pockets of areas where you can really do the best work of your life, and sometimes you find pockets where that's just not a possibility. It's really hard.
Yeah, and the sometimes it just boils down. I mean, yes, there's the company culture, but also like just finding that right team, the one where
Mhm.
it feels like home, which
Yeah,
can be such a challenge. Um,
yeah. Where the people believe in you,
yeah,
where you get to really like come into your own and shine, and like it's an amazing experience. But I really, in many ways, I wish there was some way of kind of guaranteeing that for people, or
I know, right? It's so true
like
because
having.
it's like, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's one of those things that like I do feel like the Kubernetes community does pretty good at this. There's
Yeah,
other communities out there that do pretty good at this, where they're like we know everybody had to be new at some point, and we want to
yeah,
make it so that in your time as being new, you have somebody to ask questions of. Like, how do we build that community? Which is really the crux of the community problem. Like, how do we build that community to enable you to feel like you're not an imposter, to make you feel like your contributions are valuable, that your questions are valid, that you're not just that you're not alone in this. You're not trying to run up this hill by yourself. There's a
yeah.
bunch of us running beside you. You know what I mean? Like,
It's so true. It's so true. And I think like there certain, as you said, certain communities that make it so easy to do that, that you kind of give you that safe space. And then, I think
yeah.
back to like some of the nasty shit you see on Stack Overflow,
Oh
where you're
man.
like, I'm just asking a question, and then they're like questioning your whole like existence, and you're like,
Yeah.
I just want an answer.
And the stress of all of this. I mean, even like the stress of all of this also really affects how people react or are able to spend time, right? Like if I like I've definitely run into situations where like I'm asking somebody a question and they're very resistive to the question because
Mhm.
they feel that their interpretation of this question is I'm calling into validity whether the thing you did was right or wrong. And I'm
Yes.
like, no, I, there's no right or wrong. But how they internalize that question is that I have no control over. I can say like, hey man, I think you did the absolute best you could with the information that you had at the time. One thousand
Yep.
percent every
Yep.
time. Otherwise you
Yep.
probably wouldn't have done it. Right. But yeah, it's a challenging thing. This is that people puzzle, right? Like how do you communicate effectively when the words you're using may be interpreted as a challenge
Yeah.
as opposed to
Absolutely.
just a question, right? Like
Yeah.
I seek to understand.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, and I think, to your credit and your superpower, having that perspective, um, can be extremely helpful because it probably primes you better to not have that resistance when someone
Yeah,
comes at you with a question like that.
yeah,
Yeah,
and vice versa, right? Like being able to prime the other person and say like, first of all, let's lay it out. I'm not trying to like challenge the decisions that you made.
yeah, yeah,
I'm
that's
just
true.
trying to understand how it works, and you're the best person to ask because your name's on the Git commit,
Yep,
right?
yep.
Take me on that
Absolutely.
journey, right?
It's true. Yeah, it's all about disarming, right? It's funny because I've said this to so many people. Like contributing, especially contributing to open source, can be so daunting, especially like very
yeah.
well established projects, right? Where you've got like your old guard, and you're like, oh my god, dare I, dare I throw my hat into the ring?
And I feel like, it's definitely it is absolutely one of those situations where like the longest journey begins with a single step. And the other part of this that I wanted to call back to on the whole perspective front, which I think
Mhm.
is an interesting thing for people to hear. Some people feel like if they learn a programming language and then the next programming language comes out, that everything that they did was lost work. And one thing I've learned in my career is that there is no lost work. Like that everything that you have been through, every part of your experience has set you up for success moving forward. Like if you know how to troubleshoot networks, what you're troubleshooting is a distributed system. And you can apply a lot of the same brain logic to the problem of understanding why databases aren't redistributing that you could to understanding why a network problem exists or a network partition exists. I call this like building intuition. You're constantly building intuition because you're solving problems at different levels of a stack or solving problems even within the same stack. Your your problem solving skills are what you're building. That's the thing you take with you, regardless of where you're going next.
Yeah, 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 and I think that that's what people need to remember. Even, one of the things that I always tell people, from a coding perspective is like never fall in love with your code, right?
Mm,
Because like, yeah, you write something and then someone else is gonna look at your code and build on it and make it better. And like, isn't
yeah,
that the ultimate compliment? Someone
it
is
is.
like inspired by something you've done and then thought of another way to like a way to improve it.
My gosh, just at this KubeCon in London,
Hmm.
there was a great talk that was talking about kind of changing the way that we think about security and applications and stuff. And it was neat because they based their talk on a talk that I had done with Brad and Rory and Ian in Amsterdam.
Oh, cool.
They took the idea of it and they were like, well, let's take it further. Let's understand container scanning even further than what they jumped into, right? And I
Yeah.
was like, I love that, right? Like,
Yeah.
take the idea further. Yeah. When I was a kid,
Yeah.
there was this creative whack pack. There was this set of ideas, and one of the things that they put in that pack was don't ever fall in love with an idea.
Hmm.
But it's kind of a corollary to what you're saying about
Yeah.
don't ever fall in love with your code, right?
Yeah.
The
Totally.
mental path you took to get to this idea doesn't isn't the only one. We all can agree on that.
Yeah, and
Hard.
it's never a waste. Like, I consider myself a serial blogger. And
Okay.
oftentimes I'll there was the last blog post I wrote, I started writing, I had finished writing it. I and then I started like reviewing the the copy. And I think the last thing that I had was like a conclusion to write. And I'm writing out the conclusion and I'm reviewing the copy and I'm like, oh shit, I framed this blog post as X, but I kind of buried the lead and I need to
Right.
reframe it.
Yeah.
And then, I wasn't a complete gutting, but there was definitely like a lot of rework. And whenever stuff like that happens, I just tell myself like it's okay, because what you're doing is making it better. So even if you like delete an entire section, entire paragraph, or whatever, it's totally fine because what's coming out is going to be way better than what you had before.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even the idea of challenging your own, it's like part of not falling in love with code or not falling in
Hmm.
love with an idea is is giving yourself that room to grow, right? Giving
Yes.
yourself that permission to say, actually, I've been thinking about this all wrong.
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
need somebody else to tell you that. Like you can tell you that too, right?
Being kind to
Yeah,
yourself by giving yourself permission.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, that's all part of the creative process.
exactly.
Um, I wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about your current role at Isovalent, which was acquired, I guess, semi recently by
About a year and a
system,
half
right?
ago. Yeah.
So how did you come to work at Isovalent, and talk a little bit about the work that you do?
Yeah. So I quite a few years ago now, I worked for a company called Nicira, which was
Mhm.
a network virtualization company, and it was a fascinating role because it was. I had just come from Juniper Networks, where I was a lab manager, and so I spent like basically, I think it was like 5 or 6 years or something at Juniper,
Mhm.
learning every possible way to break a network at any type of scale. And then I come to Nicira, where I am working with the team and developing network virtualization. And my part of that opportunity was like, how can I bring the skill set that I have learned in troubleshooting networks to this problem of building network virtualization? So like
Mhm.
in real networks, right?
Mhm.
Non-virtual networks, I should say.
Mhm.
Like there are things that I know how to that I'm like are ingrained in my mind about troubleshooting and understanding the state of the network as it relates to like how all things are operating.
Mhm.
When they're building a network virtualization model, like we need similar tools. I still need to know when things are propagating. I still need to understand the state of that network, whether it's virtual or real. And so it was this fascinating role where I'm like working with the team that's developing all of this software and saying, I need to know how this works. I need to understand when this happens. I need to, and just bring my real world experience in troubleshooting networks to
Yeah.
this new virtual arena. And that was just a great role. I had a wonderful time. And at that job, I met Dan Wetland,
Mhm.
who is the CEO of Isovalent. And
Nice.
I also met Thomas Graff, who at the time was a contributor to Open vSwitch, which was one of the open source projects that came out of Nicira as well. And so Dan and I have been friends the entire time. Like we've known, we run into each other at different conferences. We're always glad to see each other,
Aw.
etc. And so when uh, I decided to leave, so I was, on from Nicira. I did a bunch of other stuff. I went to Apple. I went to a company called Illumio. When I decided to leave Apple, I decided to kind of jump into Kubernetes because I saw this really incredible opportunity within the Kubernetes space.
Nice, nice.
Having lived through the OpenStack days, I was like, oh, this is going to happen again, and it's going to be Kubernetes, and it's going to be
Yeah.
really fascinating to watch. So I reached out to CoreOS. I said, you should hire me. They said, why? I said, just try it. And they interviewed me, and I got the job. I worked
That's
at
so cool.
CoreOS and then at Heptio, and uh, and then after Heptio was acquired into VMware, I decided to leave VMware. I went, and then at that time I was chatting with Dan, who had built Isovalent at that point, and Isovalent was getting to a place where they were like really going after the market. And I decided that I wanted to go and do like a field CTO role at Isovalent.
Mhm.
And so I went to Dan and I said, and I pitched it, I'm like, hey, this is what I'd like to do for Isovalent. Um, are you interested in this? And at this point, I had already at Heptio and at CoreOS built a very public persona around learning and engaging in technology and engaging in open source,
Mhm.
which is a big part of myself and a big part of what I've given to the community over years. And I said, I'd like to keep doing that,
Yeah.
but I'd also like to be part of like, a customer facing role doing sales engineering and that sort of stuff. So we built a role called field CTO, and that's the role I came into at Isovalent.
Oh, cool.
And I was there for the longest I've ever been at a startup, actually, because like most
Oh.
of the startups that I joined have either been acquired within a year or something around that space, which is, I will admit, a weird little humble brag. I'm not trying to say that I'm the reason I'm being acquired, right? But I think as it all works out, like I haven't, most of the startups I've been a part of, except for with the exception of Illumio, have been acquired within a period of time. When I first joined Isovalent, I did think that Isovalent was going to be another one of those like year-long journeys.
Yeah.
But then the pandemic happened.
Yeah.
Actually, it was in the pandemic when I joined, and then navigating all of that over the period of about, I think it was pretty close to 3 years when we were acquired,
Okay.
which is an incredible journey, an
Yeah.
incredible time as a startup, building the business from uh, you know from a very successful open source project to a reasonably successful enterprise product, and really kind of growing year over year in different, and helping hire and helping train people and helping level people up in the technology in that space, and doing a lot of public work around all of that. And now, after the acquisition, continuing to be very successful within Cisco.
Yeah.
Isovalent is continuing to grow crazily, and I think it's one of the most successful acquisitions I've ever been a part of. In that, even after a year and a half, nothing. I'm still excited to go and work on that because it's changing, because it's the same team, because the people are still here. We're still moving. We're still like learning from our experience. We're still growing as a company within Cisco. We have just an incredible opportunity, and it's been really it's been amazing to just like it's amazing to me that like even after a year and a half, I'm still excited about doing it because like in the past when Cora was acquired by Red Hat,
Yeah.
I left and went to Heptio. When Heptio was acquired by VMware, I left because I felt like that when the whole Pivotal acquisition happened, I was like,
Yeah.
this is not for me. When Nicira was acquired by VMware, we're like, oh, we have to rewrite everything, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go. And like, so after a year, to be able to say that I'm just as committed to this role, just as committed to this opportunity as I was in the first year at Isovalent is such a radically different experience than I've had at any other acquisition. That it's just, I feel very fortunate.
I mean, acquisitions can be so tricky, right? I
Oh my
mean, there's
gosh,
nothing
it's
like
so
a
hard, right? Like
culture killer if not
you're
done properly.
like in the Isovalent case, you're hiring 160 people,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you need to make sure that you have in that hiring, what are they going to do? What's the
Yep.
vision? How does it apply to the overall vision? Like what is like how do you keep them motivated? As a startup, it's pretty easy. It's like
Yeah.
be motivated or die, right? Like it's not going to work if
Yeah.
we're not all working on the same thing. But like but within a large company like Cisco, you're like, okay, well now here's the thing that we're working on that is part of moving all of Cisco forward. And here's and is that interesting to the 160 people that joined? Like, is
Yeah.
it validating their assumptions? Is it like driving them forward? Like, it's so hard to do as an acquisition. I feel like so many of them fail because they're not really. There's no concise story vision that really helps people who are coming into that scenario understand what the way forward is.
And I think that's the hardest part is like do you know where you fit in the greater scheme of things,
Yeah,
and do you feel like you're I don't know, like it's almost this feeling of claustrophobia, right? The parent company is like engulfing the acquired company, and do you maintain your culture? How do you integrate with the existing culture? Like that's
a
a
lot of
lot of
really interesting
mental.
problems. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Isovalent is also known for like eBPF. Do
Mhm.
you dabble, do anything in that on that side of things, just out of curiosity?
I do. Most of the time, I spend my time on the frameworks that we're building. So things like Cilium and
Yeah,
Tetragon.
yeah.
Tetragon is an incredible way of actually like if you have a problem that you want to solve with eBPF, Tetragon's
Mhm.
a good framework for thinking about how to implement that.
Nice.
And you can definitely check out more about it at like tetragon.io. But like I spend a lot of more of my time like helping people understand how that might work. Like if you
Yeah.
say, I want to do this and I want to have these outcomes and I want to make this change,
Mm.
like how do I do that with
Right.
Tetragon? And I'm happy to help figure that part out. I also spend a lot of my time just helping people understand Kubernetes and how networking works and all that other stuff. So within Kubernetes, so much of the networking is abstracted away
Mhm.
from your your day-to-day use. You're not thinking
Yeah.
about, okay, how do I get this pod an IP address? It's not on your mind at all, right? You might ask, how do I get traffic from outside into my application? And you're
Yep.
thinking, oh, it's a load balancer, right? Like
Yeah.
how that creates, I don't know. I'm not thinking about how all of this works in the in between, right? And that's the fun part for me is that I'm something of an expert in that part of it. Like
Yeah.
how does that infrastructure part work?
Yeah.
And to be clear, like I'm defining expert as someone who can take other people and make them proficient at a thing. That's in my mind what an expert is. It's
Oh,
not
I love
somebody who
it.
knows all the answers,
That is such
right?
a great
It's
definition. Man, if we knew all the answers, we would be rich.
Right?
Alas, 'tis not the case. I did want to ask, are you actually a Kubernetes contributor as well?
I have in the past contributed,
Mhm,
mostly I contributed to the KubeADM project at the
mhm.
time. I was working on KubeADM. I've also worked on, contributed to Kubernetes in general and some of the docs. I've contributed to, obviously to Cilium and to uh, other projects like in the space. Like I contributed a little bit to Flux and to different things.
Oh, nice.
Um,
That's cool.
but
Yay.
yeah, I think, but yeah, I mean, lately I haven't been contributing much because I've been focused on trying to help navigate this crazy big acquisition piece into Cisco.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Makes sense. Cool. Well, we are coming up on time, but before we wrap up, I was wondering if you had any words of wisdom for our audience.
I'll definitely reiterate that understanding a problem from multiple perspectives is a is a multiplier for your understanding and for your career. So being in a situation where you say, not only am I not in love with an idea, but I want to understand how you understand the idea,
Yeah.
really changes, really helps you grow. Um, the other one is make room for things to be hard. They don't have to be, not everything is easy for everybody. Things that you assume are the easiest in the world, they're so obvious, it's not even things you have to think about. These things are true for you because of your experience. And everybody has a different experience, right? So, like
Yeah.
we were just talking about this earlier, your husband
Mhm.
has dyslexia. And with the way you described his journey with dyslexia is so wildly different from my own that it may seem to me, I'm like, well, why was that so hard? Like, I wouldn't say that. But you get what I'm saying, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
that wildly different perspective of like, everywhere you look, you will see this difference in perspective.
Yeah. 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 Different
It's really
perspectives,
cool.
different journeys, right?
Yeah. Right.
These are great words of wisdom. Also, I cannot end the recording without doing a shout out to your awesome t-shirt
Thank
because
you.
hello, it's a
Capybara Life.
podcast mascot. So I've got, and I was showing you earlier, I've got this little desk lamp that you could
Oh,
squeeze.
I love it. It's squishable.
Teehee. It's so
That's
great.
amazing.
If I could, I would totally have one as a pet. Well, thank you so much, Duffy, for geeking out with me. And y'all don't forget to subscribe and be sure to check our show notes to connect with us and our guests on social media. Until next time,
Yay. Peace out and geek out.
Geeking Out is hosted and produced by me, Adriana Vilela. I also compose and perform the theme music on my trusty clarinet. Geeking Out is also produced by my daughter, Hannah Maxwell, who incidentally designed all of the cool graphics. Be sure to follow us on all the socials by going to bento.me/geekingout.